Hi, welcome back everybody. enemyzero Studios, enemyzero here. And today we have a personal video because I wanted to get into finally talking about the Sega Saturn and why I love the Sega Saturn so much and go over my US Sega Saturn collection. I do have a bunch of imports too. I'm not going to go over them in this video. And I don't have a big collection at this point, but every game in my collection has sentimental value. To me, collection videos where the people are just bragging about how much money they have, that means nothing to me. Absolutely nothing. And almost all my Saturn games I actually picked up when they were released way back in the day when I was a teenager in high school. So we're going to go over some of the games today. We're not going to go over every game in my collection because I have a lot of, sports titles and stuff like that. Stuff we don't want to go over. But I want to show off my games and maybe if there's a story with them, go through the story with you. And profess my love for the Sega Saturn. So let's go. So first things first on the Saturn journey is obviously the system. And so the system came out when I was in high school. I only had a Genesis beforehand at the time, I think. So when they first announced the Saturn, it was just through magazines. There was no internet, right? There was some information that wasn't readily available. Like the first pictures I saw of the Saturn had that cartridge slot on the back, which we know obviously as the memory card slot. And there's some RAM expansions you could put in there and stuff. But I thought maybe, hey, it played Genesis games too, because I heard about the 32X at the time, which actually came out around the time of the Saturn, but I couldn't afford a lot of stuff when I was younger, and that leads us into the whole getting the Saturn thing, because I don't like to talk about it very much because it doesn't define me, but when I grew up, we didn't have a lot of money. My mom was a single mother, and the financial means were not very strong at times. There was definitely some rough patches in my life. And the time that the Saturn came out, we were a little more stable than that, but I was too young still to have a job or anything. I mean, I was only 15 years old at the time, so that's when you have to rely on parents, right? So I begged my mom. I did odd jobs to save up when I knew it was coming out, because I knew the Saturn and the PlayStation were coming out at about the same time. I know the Saturn came out a little beforehand. It was a little surprise launch that they tried to do, didn't quite work out in the long run, but I was absolutely set on getting a Saturn over a PlayStation because I was a big Sega fan back then. I only had a Genesis. I had a Nintendo and a Genesis. I didn't have the Super Nintendo yet at that point, I don't think. And so when the Saturn was coming out, inching closer and closer to release, I had a little money saved up, but it was not a lot. And my mom, God bless her soul, she knew this was the thing I wanted the most in the entire universe. I begged and I pleaded and I did everything I could. And I was definitely short money, and she didn't tell me this at the time, but she did put up the rest of the money to buy it out on launch. I got one on the launch day. My first game was Panzer Dragoon. Going back to my mom, she didn't tell me this at the time. I found this out later, but she actually missed paying the rent that month just so I could get the Sega Saturn. And I know it feels silly sometimes to reminisce about a physical item rather than, an experience or a memory or something like that. But the fact that she did that for me and she was willing to do that for me, bratty little kid who thought he deserved the Sega Saturn, that it really melts your heart. And it's not even about the physical possession at all. It's about the fact that your mother, your loved one cares about you so much that she just wants to make you happy, even if, she goes through something like she went through when we were younger. And stuff like that can stick with you for the rest of your life. And that definitely is part of one of the reasons why, the Saturn came along in my life at the exact time to make it my favorite console of all time, which is, weird to some people. I know that. I acknowledge that. It's okay. But yes, I got one at launch. So I got the Saturn. I got Panzer Dragoon, but that was the only game we could afford at launch. That's what I had. And when I got the system home, my mom didn't know anything about it. When I got the system home, I almost had a nervous breakdown because I couldn't figure out how to hook it up. Yes, I know this is going to sound ridiculous to some people, but I had never seen a system without an RF input. It came with component cables, the red, the yellow, and the white, right? And our TV did not have those ports. It was not a good TV. It only had the RF port on the back. So I got it home, and the Saturn came with those 3 cords, and I was just like, I tried everything in the world. I put those cords into every orifice on the TV that night to try to get it hooked up, and nothing worked. I couldn't get anything to work. And then eventually I noticed our VCR, VCRs back then. Our VCR actually had those 3 inputs on it. So I was like, okay, we're cooking now. So I got those inputs into the VCR, and I eventually figured out how to turn the TV on the right channel and set the VCR right and stuff like that. And eventually, the famous Sega Saturn startup screen, and I was in heaven. And the PlayStation came out right after the Saturn. I do have a story about how I got a PlayStation. I did get a PlayStation relatively early in its lifespan, but that's another video. That's another story. Fast forward to modern days, my original launch Saturn's not around anymore. I do have a black one, which I'm showing on the screen right here. I do have some Japanese ones, different controllers and stuff like that. So I definitely have a robust collection, even though I don't have my original Saturn anymore. But what I do have is my original games, because, the Saturn came out when I was about 15 years old or so, and I did have jobs after, 16, 17 years old. I did get jobs, and I didn't have rent payments or car payments or nothing. So, I could live the high life, and I could buy more games. So I did collect for the Saturn when I was a teenager. And I do have a pretty cool collection of games. And like I said, they all have sentimental value for me. I'm not one of those collectors that just flashes my wallet and can buy everything in the world. As I collect nowadays, I do try to buy things that I do have sentimental connection to before just buying stuff to buy it. So I don't have my original console, but I do have my original game that I got when the Saturn launched, Panzer Dragoon. I love Panzer Dragoon. This game, oh man, it was just amazing. It blew my mind when I first saw it. And I actually first saw this at a Toys R Us demo unit. I think I've told this story before in the actual playthrough of Panzer Dragoon, but I originally played it in a kiosk, a demo kiosk at a Toys R Us. And it was shortly after I played Star Fox at a friend's house, Star Fox for the Super Nintendo. And the first Star Fox for the Super Nintendo blew me away too. Like I'd never seen anything like that before. Never. And it was like amazing. It was like, oh my gosh. Shooters are never going to get better than this. Never. This is perfection. This is amazing. And then like the next day I went to a Toys R Us and they had a Sega Saturn demo machine set up. This was before it came out, obviously. And that demo was rolling with the first stage of Panzer Dragoon. And oh my goodness, it blew my mind. The visuals and especially the music. The music was unreal. I'd never heard CD audio music in a video game before, especially orchestrated, like the first Panzer Dragoon soundtrack is. And it etched itself in my mind like, hey, this is an amazing step in the video game progress. And that's part of the reason why I wanted a Saturn. So I got Panzer Dragoon as my launch title. I absolutely adore it. Panzer Dragoon is probably my favorite game series of all time. So I do have, more in the collection, which we'll get to. These games are in no order, by the way. I did not order them because I'm not that smart, but, it is what it is. So, I still have my original copy of Panzer Dragoon. I love the game. It's just amazing. The next game in my collection that I want to talk about today is enemyzero. And wow, that name is so familiar. I know, this is sort of where I got my online moniker all those years ago. So enemyzero, if you don't know what it is, it's like a first-person survival horror, I guess. And the cool part about it is, or the unique part about it is, the enemies are invisible. You can't see them at all. So you have to hear them. Like if you listen to the sort of sounds surrounding you, you need to try to shoot them before they kill you. It is super hard. I don't think I've ever beat the game. I've gotten far, but it's so difficult because your gun, once you shoot it, you literally have to wait like 5 seconds to shoot another round. So if you miss this invisible alien that's licking your ear, then you're just dead. And enemyzero was a semi-sequel to a game called D, which is it's a basic FMV game that's made by the same people. And there's not much to it, and there's honestly not much to enemyzero either. But it is how I got my name, essentially. Although my name is different, it's only one word. But I did, I've had my website since then, enemyzero.com. And now, Enemy Zero Studios, my digital production company. So obviously a combination of the game and the Sega Saturn and everything. And that's how I fell in love with the name too. Next game up is no surprise because I have full walkthrough videos on the channel already. But it's Magic Knight Ray Earth. And this is a game that came out way later in the Saturn's lifespan. This is one of those, I think, final games that came out for it that would only made like 10,000 copies or something like that. 10,000, unique units. And I was a huge fan of working designs. I still am. I still love all the old games, the PlayStation games and the Saturn games. I mean, some people dog on working designs a little bit, but back in the day, as me growing up, I loved role-playing games. Role-playing games. That's what I love. I had the time to do them, and working designs took these amazing Japanese RPGs and some other games that would never come out here normally and brought them out here with, funny translations and the packaging, right? Like even looking at the package to this, I hope the glare is not too much on the screen. It's got the metallic cover with giant instruction books. It's so amazing. Translation notes in the back. They did a lot of special editions, especially for the PlayStation. But the Sega Saturn, they loved a lot of the games on the Sega Saturn. And Magic Knight Ray Earth is an amazing action RPG. It's not very long, but it is amazing. It's got full anime cinemas in it from the show that it's based on, the anime it's based on. And I really don't think it's ever going to get remade on anything or even ported to any digital thing. So it's one of those titles that's just stuck on the Saturn. You either have it or you don't have it. It's worth a lot of money nowadays. Not that I care about that at all. Like I said, these have sentimental value for me. My favorite game developer of all time is Treasure. And so one of Treasure's classic games, was unique to the Saturn. It's been ported a few times now to a few different things. But, Guardian Heroes. I got this based on Game Fan magazine reviews back in the day, and the fact that I did love Treasure. I played some Treasure games before then, and I knew it was going to be ballin', and it is ballin'. Again, I have gameplay videos of this up on the channel, and I just love this game. There's so much replayability to it too. Like back in the day, I tried to get... There were so many different endings and branching paths in the game that it kept me busy forever. It was a super good purchase. The only thing I really don't like about it is look at this cover. That cover is one of the ugliest covers like in the history of man. But it is an amazing game. There's a bunch of different characters. They all play slightly different. Bunch of different branching paths. The gameplay is unique. You jump on the 3 planes, can do magic attacks. And I think it was the second or third game I got for the system. So it definitely has a huge place in my heart. All right, next up in the collection is Sonic Jam. Obviously, you gotta have a Sonic game, and there was no proper Sonic game on the Saturn. But when Sonic Jam was coming out and I was reading reviews and stuff about it, the people were really hyping up the 3D world in it. They were like, hey, this 3D world is so good. And the 3D world in this game is just like to choose the game you're gonna play. It's just like a slight like museum-y overworld, like, hey, go to this door to do this thing, go to this door to this thing. But it wasn't a game in itself. But people were like, oh, this is the blueprint for, a 3D Sonic game on the Sega Saturn, which obviously never materialized. 3D Blast it's not the same. But back in the day, there was no digital downloads, right? So this was the best way to play the Sonic games on the Saturn. All right, next up in my collection is another Working Designs game. I'm going to do a playthrough of this on the channel pretty soon. Albert Odyssey. I adore this game. I love the graphic style. I love the pixel art, the animation and everything. And I know this game has problems. The loading times are quite a lot. However, when Working Designs did bring this over to the US, they reduced those loading times. Like the original Japanese version is actually way worse than that. And that's part of why I like Working Designs, is they optimized games a little bit. They did change games a little bit in a good way. Maybe some of their changes weren't the best 100% of the time, but most of the changes were definitely for the best. And this is another side-scrolling RPG, like an old style like Final Fantasy game, but the characters are a little, more cute than that. It's not very long. It's not super complicated or anything. It matches more with like a Lunar type game than a Final Fantasy type game, but I absolutely adore it, and I will play it on the channel eventually. And just like the other Working Designs games, it got the same sort of treatment, like the super glossy cover, the foil cover, and all the translation notes inside, the cool discs even. It's definitely an amazing game, and it's another game that's probably not going to get ported anywhere. So again, stuck on the Saturn, that's why it's super expensive. All right, next game I got from my childhood, Legend of Oasis. Again, I am going to play this for the channel someday too. And I love this game. I love Zelda. I did play Link to the Past before this at a friend's house. But again, I think I saw stuff about this in Game Fan magazine, and I wanted to try it. And again, I fell in love with the game. I never played, this is a sequel to Beyond Oasis on the Genesis, and I never played that. So I just went straight into Legend of Oasis, and I was blown away by some of the game design in it. How it was definitely more complicated than just a normal top-down Zelda type game. I know Zelda has its puzzles and stuff, but Legend of Oasis had like the elements. You can summon like elemental powers and solve puzzles based on that, and it was very difficult. I remember really hating, I don't know, the Wind Temple or something in this game. It drove me crazy when I was younger. Remember, no internet. So it was either buy a strategy guide or you're out of luck. And I really love the graphic style, the music, and the sound effects of this game. They're really nostalgic to me. And Legend of Oasis really hit that natural sort of action RPG sweet spot for me back in the day. All right, next game in the collection, Panzer Dragoons Y, which is Panzer Dragoon 2, obviously. And again, I've made gameplay videos of this. I've talked about this before too. Again, there's no real story about getting this. Like there's the first Panzer Dragoon. Obviously, this came out only a year after the first one. So this was the first year of the Saturn's life cycle. And this game almost got perfect reviews in Game Fan magazine, which I hope you're catching on, was definitely my favorite magazine back in the day. I wish I still had my Game Fan magazines, but my house flooded in Florida multiple times, and I lost all my magazine collection during one of the hurricane floods at some point. So anyways, Panzer Dragoons Y was just, if the first one was a 10 out of 10, this is a 12 out of 10. You know what I mean? Like it takes everything in the first one, cranks it up to 11. It's that much better. It's that much cooler. The music was better. The graphics were better. The gameplay was better. The levels were better. And the first game was a perfect game to me. So this is like a double perfect game? I don't know. So this has a huge place in my nostalgic heart for the Sega Saturn. Out of the shooters, this is arguably the best in the series. I might even like it better than Orta on the Xbox. All right, next up, Shining Force 3. I'm not a big strategy game person, but I do love this game. I love Final Fantasy Tactics on the PlayStation. Like there's a few of them that I've just absolutely loved over the years. And this was one of those final Sega Saturn games that was limited to, 10,000 units or something like that. This was when the Saturn was going out of style. It was, they were giving up on it, pulling the plug. And this is one of those final games that only got a 10,000 unit print run. There is sequels to this or other part 2 and part 3, but those only came out in Japan. You can play those now. I can play those now. I have a Sadiator, and there's English patches for them. So you can play those now. But obviously, I didn't have that back in the day. I had this back in the day. So again, Sega didn't hide the fact that the Saturn was going the way of the dodo, right? And, they were quite transparent. Hey, these last 3 or 4 games, they're getting a very small print run, and that's going to be it. So I was very conscious of that. So I got Shining Force, I got Magic Knight, I got Panzer Dragoon Saga, which we'll see in a second. And was there another one? There was a 4th one, Burning Rangers, I think. But believe it or not, I do not have Burning Rangers. So that's one of the ones I missed. Obviously, I had a job back then, but I wasn't rich. I could only buy a game once in a while. And the Saturn is where I bought them. So, I didn't have a PlayStation until a little bit later. So anyways, Shining Force 3, it was another game that I never seen before the Saturn. I've never seen, I know Shining Force was on the Genesis, but this one was much more visual because it had 3D models in it rather than just 2D, even though the old Shining Forces did have that. You walk up, you hit an attack, and you see the animation. This brought it to a whole new level to me. And I actually really like this game. And again, knowing the Saturn was going away and buying this as one of the final titles, it definitely has nostalgic value for me. I'll never get rid of it. All right, next up we got a shooter, and it's one of my favorite shooters of all time. It's called In the Hunt. And, gameplay-wise, it's probably not the best shooter of all time. but I love the graphics. The graphic style and the fact that you're a submarine, you're not a flying jet, is a little bit different, right? The graphic style of In the Hunt is almost, it's very Metal Slug-esque, very Neo Geo-esque. And I think that's why I gravitated towards it. I think that's why I loved it so much. And it's semi-collector's item nowadays. It was released on the PlayStation 2, but the 2D powerhouse of the Saturn is clearly better. But it is a really cool, unique game because you're a submarine. You can shoot missiles up on top of the water if you go to the surface of the water. There is a lot of slowdown in it that you got to deal with, but you just got to deal with it. And the Saturn is definitely one of the best shooter systems of all time, like plane shooters. And this is up there on my list for sure. Oh man, this next one I spent so much time with. The next one is like Shining Force 3. It did have a sequel that never released here. The sequel does have a patch nowadays, so you can play it. Although I've never played it, but oh my gosh, I played so much of this game. Dragon Force, another Working Designs game. Man, like I'm telling you, whenever I would always save my money up. Whenever there's a Working Designs game coming out, a first party Sega game coming out, or like a treasure game coming out, those were my hits. Those were my dopamine for the Sega Saturn. And this is no exception. This is another strategy game. I know I say I don't like strategy games, but I'm showing off a lot, huh? But anyways, again, with this game, it's stuff I've never seen before. You could literally have 100 units on screen at once, and I'd never seen anything like that before. There was a Working Designs games. There was RPG elements. Translation was good. There was anime cinemas. Dragon Force definitely had it all. And again, it's another one of those stuck on Saturn games that I don't know. I don't think it's been ported anywhere, so it might be stuck on Saturn forever. But I definitely remember the countless time I put into this game because there's so much strategy. There's so many different units. There's so many different combinations. You have a world map and you can choose to start the game with any of these different factions. And whichever faction you choose to start the game, it increases or decreases the difficulty of the game, right? Because some people are harder than others. It was just so cool back in the day, and I spent so much time on this game, and I love it. All right, next up we have Dark Savior, which I didn't play a lot of back in the day. It wasn't my favorite game, but it still fulfilled that niche of like action RPG-ish a little bit. There's some weird battles in it, like the bosses are like these one-on-one, like semi-fighting style battles. But it's an isometric perspective, like, Landstalker or something like that on the Genesis. And it does have good graphics. Definitely was no Legend of Oasis, but it has its place in the Sega Saturn universe. Next up is an amazing first-person shooter called Power Slave. This is actually made by a company named Lobotomy. And what Lobotomy did back in the day was super impressive. So I have a couple Lobotomy games because I heard this story, probably through a Game Fan magazine. But, the Saturn was always known as not being as powerful as the PlayStation. It can't do certain things, so certain games didn't come to the Saturn. Well, Lobotomy was a smaller development studio, I think based in Seattle. Maybe I'm wrong. But they were like, we don't care what people say. We can make this work. And so Power Slave was, I think, maybe their first-person shooter game that they did on the Saturn, which led into more, which I'll show in a second. But again, coming from a Genesis to the Saturn, I'd never really played first-person shooters, really, until some of these ones on the Saturn. And Power Slave just blew my mind. It was like next level. I'd played Zero Tolerance on the Genesis, and I'd played a couple PC first-person shooters at, my friend's house. So I knew what a first-person shooter was. But just the graphic fidelity and, the setting, I do love Egyptian-type settings. And everything in this game was just absolutely just iconic to the Saturn. And I know this got a PlayStation port, but this was definitely an eye-opener to see a full 3D, realized universe with amazing lighting effects and amazing setting. It had cool weapons. It had cool everything. And it ran so smooth and so perfect. I loved it. Power Slave, never played it. There's a lot of like backtracking in it. It's almost like a Metroid type game. You can get weapons and then go back to previous areas and stuff like that. So I never really played anything quite like that in my life. It wasn't, just level based. This is big sort of worlds. You can go forward and backwards and come back to previous areas and stuff. So Power Slave has a huge place in my nostalgia for the Sega Saturn. And speaking of lobotomy, after the job that they did with Power Slave, they got more jobs. I don't have it anymore, I don't think. But I used to have Duke Nukem 3D, so they did the Duke Nukem 3D Saturn port. And again, it was amazing. It was better than the PlayStation. And it's on this less powerful system that, people said would never be able to do it. And Lobotomy did it. And based on those successes too, they eventually did a Quake version. And this raised the bar even more because Quake is completely polygons. There's no sprites at all in it. It's a complete 3D world, 3D characters, 3D enemies, 3D player, 3D weapons, everything. And it ran so beautifully. Not as good as a PC, obviously. But Lobotomy, oh my gosh, what an amazing development house they were. The stuff they did, people say were impossible, but they did it. They were like, F that, we're gonna do it. And I really did like the creepy atmosphere and the dark brooding nature of it. The soundtrack, I think Trent Reznor did the soundtrack for this. And I was definitely into Nine Inch Nails back in the day. So this game was an amazing pickup for the Saturn, and I definitely loved it. I mean, what Sega Saturn owner doesn't have Daytona USA? Daytona USA in the arcade, one of the greatest arcade racing games of all time. This version, not so much. This was the original first ever Sega Saturn game that came bundled with the system, I think, maybe? And there's a lot of graphical issues with it. There's a lot of pop-up. And, the control wasn't quite as tight as the arcade, but it was Daytona USA. It is fun. They did re-release this as a, I forget what the next one is, like Championship Edition or something like that, or Special Edition, where they fixed the pop-in. But I felt that edition, they changed the controls too, so it didn't control as well. So I actually prefer this version. Yes, with all the pop-up and stuff, just because I think the controls are a little funner, more fun. It's definitely nothing like the arcade version. The arcade version was just awe-inspiring back in the day, but it is a Sega Saturn classic. And so I guess let's stay on the Sega racing game clip right now. So I do have Sega Rally, and Sega Rally was at one time my favorite racing game of all time. Or not at one time, for some time. I absolutely loved this game. Like, this game was everything Daytona USA was, but the graphics were better. The control was better. It was rally racing. I personally like rally racing games a lot. I like the floatiness of it, I guess you could say. And this game was so good. The only drawback to these games is there's only I think 3 tracks. So they're not infinitely replayable or anything like that. But I just adored this game. I played the heck out of it, loved every minute. And then they went one further and released Sega Touring Car Championship. This was definitely later down in the line. But again, just like Sega Rally improved everything from Daytona, this improved everything from Sega Rally. I still personally like Sega Rally better than this, but it's essentially, the same thing, just again, a little bit different, a little bit better. There's 4 cars and maybe 3 tracks again, so it's pretty limited in its options. And I know this got overshadowed a lot because at this time when this came out, there was definitely better games on the PlayStation coming out with, 20 cars, Gran Turismo and stuff like that was coming out. So this is another arcade racer that kind of got forgotten about a little bit. But I did have it. I did love all 3 of these racing, the Sega Racing trilogy. You can see how beat up my case is. Oh, and now the next racing game. This one. Oh, this one. So, Wipeout. I adore Wipeout and Wipeout XL, the first 2. I know there's a lot of Wipeouts nowadays. There's compilation Wipeouts. There's a lot on the, PSP. There's some on the PS4 now. There's so many Wipeouts over the years. But the original Wipeout, when I got it, I think I maybe first got it on PlayStation and I got this version after that, just because I was a Saturn fan, so I wanted the Saturn version. But when I first played Wipeout, again, it was something like I never played before. They were like hovercrafts, like spaceships, and you could, do tight turns with the triggers on the 3D controller. And I loved how they had weapons, and they were definitely a little bit different than other racing games at the time. And obviously, the number one selling point from Wipeout, and especially Wipeout XL. Wipeout XL on the PlayStation, easily one of my top racing games of all time. I adore it. But the reason why I adore them, I'm getting at, is the soundtracks. The CD-based soundtrack for both of them is just amazing. And this soundtrack is the same as the PlayStation one. PlayStation 1's graphics do look better. I'll be quite clear, quite honest, okay? This is the inferior version, but I do have it on the Saturn. I do love it. XL came out on the Saturn, but I think it was Japan only. Whereas XL came out in the US PlayStation, and that's the one I mostly identify with. That's my favorite Wipeout of all time, is XL on the PlayStation, but I did like this on the Saturn. I love the soundtrack. I love the controls, even though controls are a little floaty. Some people don't like them. It's okay. And what Saturn fan doesn't have a Virtual Cop game? So I have Virtual Cop 2 here. I can't find the first one. Obviously, I did have the first one. I had that Daytona Virtual Cop, like Virtual Fighter, like 3-pack thing, you know what I mean? I can't find it. So it's in a box somewhere, maybe. But I do have Virtual Cop 2, which is obviously the superior Virtual Cop. And again, as a gun game, I think I like Virtual Cop a little bit more than the Time Crisis games. The PlayStation was known for the Time Crisis games where you can duck behind things. And I definitely just liked the arcade style of Virtual Cop a little bit more. And Virtual Cop 2 is definitely better than Virtual Cop 1 on the Saturn. So I love having this in the collection. And it was super awesome to play this with a friend back in the day. You just sit down, put this in, shoot some dudes, and have fun. Eat some Cheetos. Alright, there's only a couple more left in the collection. And like I've said before, I don't have a huge collection at this time. I have had big video game collections in the past at certain times in my life. But my life, just like probably your life too, is full of ups and downs. So I've had to purge and sell off a lot of my collection over the years. But the one thing I've tried to never sell, no matter how dire my financial situation was my Saturn game. So that's another reason why all these have such sentimental value for me, because it's been the one thing that I've held on to over the years. I've had almost all these Saturn games since they initially came out. So anyways, jumping back on the shooter bandwagon, I do have Galactic Attack, and I definitely love Galactic Attack. It's I love the sequel a little bit more. Lair section, Ray Storm. Ray Crisis, Ray Storm. And I believe Ray Storm only came out on the PlayStation. It was a Working Designs game under their Spaz label. But this was the original, and this is all 2D. So maybe I'm getting the names mixed up, but Ray Crisis, the sequel, was all polygon. This one is a classic 2D shooter, and the Saturn's got so many good shooters. I have some of them in my Japanese games. Once I dig them out, I'll do a Japanese game video if people are interested in that. I don't know. But I definitely like shooters over the years, even though I'm not very good at them. And this is definitely one of my favorite series of all time. I love how you can shoot forward and you can shoot your lasers at stuff in like the background and stuff. It's just a really cool shooter overall, and I'm really happy that I still have it. And yes, the last game in my Sega Saturn collection from my childhood. Again, I had all these when I was younger. Bought them all, most of them all, with my own money. So they have sentimental value to me. I'm not just flashing the cash and buying stuff now. Everyone knows what this is going to be. Panzer Dragoon Saga. This is my original launch copy of it. And when this actually originally came out, it was very challenging to even find it. And so I'll share that story now. So yes, this is my original copy. I've beaten it multiple times. One of my favorite RPGs of all time. Panzer Dragoon is my favorite game series of all time. So of course I had to get this. When I was growing up, RPGs were my favorite type of game. So Panzer Dragoon, I'm in love with. RPGs I'm in love with. Put them together. Oh my gosh. But again, this was one of the final releases for the Saturn. So there was only 10,000 of these made. And so I distinctly remember this. I talked about my mom helping me out earlier, obviously getting the Saturn. And this time the hero of the day was my sister. Because when Panzer Dragoon Saga came out, I actually did not have enough money for it. So I had to borrow money. So I only had maybe like half of it. So, here comes my sister. And I've had my ups and downs with my sister, like many people do, many siblings do, you know what I mean? And we definitely had our ups and downs, and we didn't get along all that well. We're complete opposite personality-wise and everything. But anyways, I explained to her, hey, this game series has a special place to me, and I have to get this game. Can you please help me out? And she said yes. She actually spotted me the other half of the money that I would pay her back later to get the game. So we went to the local EB Games, which is where I normally buy games. I would buy games from EB Games at the mall back then. That's where I got some Saturn imports too, which we'll go over in the next video, whenever that is. But anyways, we went to EB Games to actually buy the game. Out of stock. They did not get one single copy, not one single copy. And remember, I know that these are the limited 10,000, never be printed again Sega Saturn games. If I did not get it today, I was never gonna get it. So I was like, okay, we're just gonna go get it from Toys R Us. So we drove to Toys R Us. So my sister was driving me at the time. I did not have a driver's license. My sister was driving me. So I went to Toys R Us, down the game aisle, and back then, I don't know if you're aware, back then Toys R Us didn't have games on display. They had those little papers. They would just have the name of the game, you take a paper, you bring it to the front, and then you pay for it, and then they go get the actual game out of this little prison cell, this little red evil looking cage that they have, and actually give you the game. And so we get to Toys R Us, we go down the aisle, I'm all excited. We get to the little Panzer Dragoon Saga thing, and there's no papers inside. Not one single paper, sold out. I was starting to panic. I was like, this is not happening. This is not real. This is not good. Am I really going to miss out on this? I got Magic Knight. I got Shining Force. This is the trifecta. This is the third one that I need. Remember, I skipped Burning Rangers. This is the third one that I need. This is I need this. So, there was another Toys R Us. And this was probably about a 30-minute drive away. There was one more chance, one more Toys R Us. So my sister fronted me the money to buy this, the extra money. And I had to convince her to drive me 30 minutes away on the chance that they might have a Panzer Dragoon Saga there. And again, she said yes. And she did this for me. And I will eternally be thankful for that. Because I know we've had our ups and downs when we were younger. We're fine now, obviously. I don't know if she ever even understood, though, what this meant to me. So if my sister watches this video, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this core memory that I have. So anyways, we drive to the second Toys R Us. We go in. Hallelujah. In the aisle, there's 2 slips left. Bam! I got it. So this Panzer Dragoon Saga was almost not to be. I almost did not get it. If I did not get it, there's no internet back then. There was no nothing. I don't know how I would have got this. And obviously, being the most expensive Sega Saturn game at this point, I'm very fortunate to have this in my collection already. But to me, honestly, my copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga is priceless. There is no price on it. You know what I mean? Because it's got that sentimental value into it. Just like the rest of my Saturn collection. I really hope that there never comes a day where I have to get rid of my Saturn collection. And I have owned more games than this. I have filtered out some of them over the years. Not a lot of them, and obviously not the ones that I really love. And again, this selection of games is a selection of games that I really love. So I've had a lot of Saturn games that I have sold over the years, but they didn't mean much to me. So even if they're super expensive now, I do regret selling them, but these are the ones that have sentimental value for me. These are the ones that, transport me back to my teenage years while I was still in high school. No worries. Loved RPGs. Loved working designs. I don't know. So guys, gals, non-binary pals, thanks for watching my Sega Saturn video. Do you have any favorite memories of the Sega Saturn? Let me know below. Let's reminisce a little bit. Do you have a story like my story for Panzer Dragoon Saga, almost missing out on it? Let me know. Let's chat. Let's share our love. Let's have fun. All right. Thanks for watching. Peace out.